For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh. Revi. On The Gist today, we're discussing India reopening its embassy in Kabul with India's former envoy to Afghanistan, Gautam Mukhopadhaya. Ambassador Mukhopadhaya, we talked shortly before this happened, but it was moving towards this, wasn't it?
Yes. It's a logical step. I think it was implicit in the last visit that they were surveying the landscape, reassuring themselves that this would be a worthwhile step, and I think they have taken it.
You went in as charge d'affaires as well.
Right.
Now, it's a completely topsy-turvy or a reversal of scenarios when you went in and what the CDA currently who's gone in.
Yes, I think that's very well described. When I went there, this delegation or this mission is described as a technical team. When I went there with an ambiguous title of a liaison officer because though the Northern Alliance, backed by the US Special Forces, had taken over Kabul, there was no government in place as yet. It was just the Northern Alliance authorities who had taken charge. And it was only after the Bonn Accord that we had an interim or a transitional administration from when I was upgraded to charge d'affaires. By that I mean that basically the prospects at that time were looking good. Today, I'm not so sure. So I think the government is right in describing it as a technical team, which does not say anything one way or the other. And it does give the appearance that they're going to provide some basically technical services and watch the situation.
So essentially, what you're trying to navigate is a situation where you don't want to give, whether it's de facto or legal, legitimacy to the Taliban government, yet you want to engage with it.
Right.
Or you think that's the most logical step?
Yeah. So let me put it like this. I think the government has been in a dilemma right since August 15, whether to, so to say, as the saying goes, accept reality of the reality of the Taliban, or continue to support the Republican ideals of the past regime. I think what has made a difference has been that two things. One is that it seems that as in over the last 9 months, which the government has been watching, that the Taliban virtually have now a monopoly of power, that the resistance is not yet strong enough to be able to contemplate that option. And this has been accompanied by very strong signals on the part of the Taliban that they want a relationship with us, and a fairly ample relationship from what you can see in the news, going even up to defense training in India and so on. So I think that has tipped the balance, given everything together. But I think one of the things that has made a big difference is that that obviously it's a signal also that Afghanistan is very important to us, and that the relationship with the people matters. In other words, those who are left behind in Afghanistan do want this engagement, whether they are pro-Taliban or anti-Taliban. Of course, the expatriate community, the exile community may not be very happy with it. But from what we gather, the large majority in Afghanistan likes the message that India remains engaged with Afghanistan despite or in spite of the Taliban.
So looking at a timeline without giving fixed timelines, I mean, just looking at it in that sense, it was building up to this, it's happened, there is a team there, there have been security guarantees, we'll talk about how nebulous that is. How does it move from here?
Yeah. So I think the test case in this is really if we have gone there ostensibly for 2-3 reasons. One is that we want to monitor humanitarian aid, which was directed towards the people, that's fine. You want to know, you want to have your eyes and ears on the ground to know what's happening. I think that also can be justified. I don't think we should delude ourselves into thinking that we are not in some ways scaling up the degree of legitimization or recognition of the government by doing so. And as I mentioned last time, that others will also follow. But the test case is really going to be whether we are going to follow this up with actually taking some measures that enable or improve the people-to-people flow between Afghanistan and India. We've done well with the Afghan students who have been here, their stay and their education has been extended. But there are many Afghan students who are left behind, who are agitating, or as a matter of right to their own education, that they be able to come back and resume their studies. There are many more who would probably like to continue their studies. There are hundreds and thousands who would like to come here for medical treatment. And there are at least a handful, if not more, who would like to come here because they are insecure and unsafe. And this is one part of it. And the second part of it is that engaging with the Taliban is fine in this uncertain environment and so on. Maybe you can justify that. But it's equally important to keep your channels open with the opposition, and that the opposition also feels that those channels are meaningful. So I am hoping, of course, not all of this can take place in the open, in open, but I'm hopeful that the government is keeping all these things in mind. And what we will wait to see is whether, it is supported by the kind of steps that are required. Otherwise, as a technical team, it will be providing, we run the risk of disappointing the Afghans who look up to India for some kind of people-to-people assistance, as opposed to development assistance, which are larger things and so on. So I think they will be looking up to that, and their expectations will be raised by this. As it is with the e-visa scheme, we have dashed a lot of hopes that we ourselves generated. I hope that that doesn't happen again.
There's a lot of hurt and
Right.
anger and resentment at how India behaved soon after 15th August. But what has changed? You see, whether it's top officials in the Taliban regime, Ministry of Interior, Foreign Affairs, reassuring India about security guarantees. But nothing can really be guaranteed. What happens if something goes wrong?
Right. I'm sure the government would have factored that in. I think the fact that it has decided to do this means it has taken, it has made a resolve to stick it through thick and thin. So I don't see, let's say a kind of negative development or an episode actually sort of derailing this process, because that would reflect very poorly on the government. I'm presuming that it is calculated. As far as the larger thing is concerned, if you remember, I recall that I said last time as well that, look, this is a historical relationship. And in many ways, the Pashtuns, who are the main pillar of the Taliban, are the flag bearers of this relationship through their trade and economic and, migratory relationship over generations and centuries. So it's very much in the Pashtun, including the Taliban blood, what India means to them historically, and also actually in terms of religion. After all, the fountainhead of their religious doctrine, the Deoband school, is still in India. And even though that Deoband is very different from the Deoband that has been mutated in Pakistan and exported to Afghanistan. So, I think those kind of sentimental and historical ties do beckon them. So I think a lot of the positive signals that you are seeing are coming from that background, the image of India amongst the local population in Afghanistan, the trading relationship that used to exist in the past, particularly from the Kandahar area, but other areas as well. There used to be hing coming from Mazar and many other fruits and agricultural products.
There are indications that trade of some sort, now I presume it would be through the air bridges again, and probably to start off with more from their side than our side in terms of flights. But if this technical team is looking at consular services or aid, it's fine as far as the aid that is being sent there. But do you take it a step further and go into the aid projects that India was working at before? Water,
I would be
electricity?
very careful about that, because the internal situation in Afghanistan is still very, very fragile, and actually I would say negative. If anything, the Taliban has doubled down on its extremist ideology. And what we are seeing over the last 9 months is a kind of intense and increased persecution. Whether it is repression and deprivation of rights of the women, that's one thing. but also atrocities and persecution of ethnic minorities. It started off with the Tajiks in Panjshir. Now we are seeing the case of the Hazaras. Of course, Hazaras has been all along. They've claimed that it's the ISK, but in this case, it is directly the Taliban. And there have been frictions within the Taliban between their minority commanders and the Pashtun commanders. So I think there is an ethnic fault line which has opened up and that has grown during this period. So, when we talk about aid projects and so on, I think this has to be very modulated according to circumstances on the ground, so that you don't appear to be in effect, actually strengthening, number one, the Taliban government, and being partisan in terms of a kind of ethnic or even other political fault line that comes up. Whereas there is a very strong option to be able to increase the kind of assistance that you provide outside Afghanistan, in India, through the kind of measures that I mentioned, even trade, but particularly education, health, and some form of tacit or support for those in need of refuge.
How do you maneuver this fine line between giving the Taliban credibility for projects,
Right.
Whereas it gives benefit to the people in Afghanistan?
Right.
How do you
Yeah,
maneuver that line?
this is a difficult question. I think it'll have to be, seen literally as a case-to-case kind of thing. Development projects are of two sorts. One is a kind of infrastructure project where, you can build a road and it benefits everyone, but it doesn't necessarily affect people kind of immediately. There are others like electricity or water that affect people, also much more immediately. I would say that, at this point of time, this is my personal view. Of course, the government may have another view. If they are reaching out to us, we also have some leverage. We also have some negotiating room. And for everything that we give them, we are entitled to get something back. So I think a lot will depend on this negotiation. It cannot be a one-way relationship that we give them something and they are not willing to give us something in return. So I think we'll have to negotiate that. We'll have to negotiate really how much it is benefiting people. And we'll have to negotiate what it means for the large majority of people who do not want a strengthening of the Taliban rule. And the fact that you may not see armed uprisings or protests doesn't mean that there is a tacit or even otherwise a kind of acceptance of Taliban rule. I continue to believe that the Taliban rule is unpopular. It is tolerated in certain parts. They have no option. They have to live with it. In some areas, it may be tolerated a little more, mainly on ethnic grounds. But I don't think they have the legitimacy, and it's unlikely that they will get the legitimacy given the direction that they are going. They are hardening their regulations, whether it's education or women, or in due course, we will see more and more, of this kind of hardening of their doctrine itself. What we are seeing, for example, is that in terms of jurisprudence, they're already moving towards a kind of jurisprudence that benefits the Sunnis and leaves out the Shias. They're expanding their madrasa education. The curriculum is going. So tomorrow, even if they allow girls' education, it is going to be a very much a madrasa education. So I think we also need to look, in the long run, is this kind of extremist dispensation, which is on the opposite end of the spectrum of everything that we stand for. Whether it's a liberal India or it is a kind of a more religiously right India, it's on the opposite end of the spectrum. So I think we have to see, strategically, we have to see what is better for us in the long run. Tactically, we have to make, adjustments. I think that's something that we and others need to understand. But we also need to look at it down the road, long term.
Going just a few weeks back up the road, you saw what happened in Kartik Parwan in the Gurdwara.
Right.
And that was while this whole process of India reopening its embassy was taking place. It did take place a few days later. Pakistan and its role in Afghanistan? How do you see their relationship?
So, of course, as far as this particular episode was concerned, the it was claimed by the ISK. The Taliban, I think, made the right kind of noises. One Taliban soldier lost his life. So I think we can give the benefit of doubt that this was not conducted by the Taliban. It was conducted by people who wanted to embarrass the Taliban. And that could be either the ISK or it could be elements that are behind Pakistan. For lack of evidence, I think we can't jump to conclusions. But you can be sure that the more the Taliban engages with India, that Pakistan will have its alternative horses in the race, or in Afghanistan, to keep the pot boiling, to keep Afghanistan unstable, to keep Afghanistan insecure, so that Afghanistan remains their prerogative and their backyard, and it does not become an international roundabout for aid or trade or investment or anything like that. The ultimate Pakistani end game is to keep Afghanistan backward economically as well as as well as ideologically. And if at all, since they speak the language of geoeconomics, their geoeconomics means turn Afghanistan's traditional relationship away from India, particularly the economic relationship, towards Central Asia. This is going against geography. It is going against history. It is going to be futile. And I think that's another strategic angle that we have in engaging Afghanistan, particularly at the people-to-people level. That this, and I would say also trade, because I think it is this trade relationship. In many ways, trade is the best form of people-to-people relationship, because who is trading? It's individual traders. It's private traders largely who are individual. So I think this is something that we have to continue to keep this engagement alive. But we have to limit our relationship with the Taliban until and unless they show signs and actually implement policies that are inclusive and that are acceptable to the large majority of Afghanistan, including women's rights, minority rights, and other civil liberties and political rights.
Do we have any leverage to do that?
No. I don't think we should delude ourselves that we are going to, through our assistance, make any difference to the Taliban. What we should be careful is that by our assistance, we don't actually strengthen them in this, in their hardening of their agenda.
Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhaya, as usual, thank you for letting us pick your brains and experience.
Welcome. My pleasure. Thank you.
And do send in your feedback on this particular interview, the situation in Afghanistan, your views and opinions. You can write into us on the YouTube comments box. This is StratNews Global. You've been watching The Gist, and I'm Amitabh Revi.